Hello YouTube, I'm Elwirfy and today we're going to be playing, or I guess not playing, but we are going to be taking a look at some more diplomacy strategy. Today we're going to be taking a look at the last country that we have yet to cover as I adjust the camera here to make sure we can clearly see what we're focusing on. We're focusing on Italy. It's a great nation. Totally not the worst nation statistically. Italy's very hard to play. Probably going to be the most difficult for new players as well, because understanding, the tactics and understanding the relationships that you automatically inherit because you're Italy is important to understand in terms of progressing through the game. And one thing you want to think about when you're going to be Italy, if if you're drawing it, your buddies, someone gets England, they're like, oh no, that's easy, and everyone's laughing. And of course, when you're playing this game, no one, you never think to yourself, oh, what if I get Italy? No one thinks that, because what are the odds you'll get Italy, right? Very likely, actually. Italy is a very common, unfortunate kind of circumstance to be put into. But there are solutions. Don't worry. There is a way out. So today we're going to be talking about the Italian strategies that'll give you the statistically little bit better odds. I'm not saying it's going to be great. Still might actually be really bad, but because again, it's very hard. So the first thing you need to understand if you're going to think about playing, if you get forced into playing Italy, there's 3 main openings, and then there's a couple variation openings depending on your diplomacy. So I'm going to start with the actions that you can take if you assume everyone is a bad guy. So what I'm going to show you is what you do if you think everyone is evil. So step 1, you want to take this fleet and you go out to the Ionian Sea. You pretty much always make this move as Italy. There's only one reason why you would go into the Tiberian Sea, but we'll cover that in the variations. The next step, which is automatic, is you're going to be pushing, well, for me anyway, Rome goes to Naples. Because what you're doing is you're going to end up convoying into Tunis with this army going Ionian Sea convoy for the fall move to get your supply center. So you should always get this. If you fail to get that as Italy, you have a problem. Leaving one guy here to defend. Now, if you know anything about how the diplomacy works, you know that there's a gap here. So this army here from France, it will not be able to make it to Rome. So you just want to, as Venice, sit and you're going to attack. You actually want to attack Trieste. You're also going to, in diploming, when you have the opportunity to talk to the other nations, you should already have a planned bounce. This fleet should be attacking Venice. From the Italian perspective, that's what you want. Because then you'll both bounce back, and then 1902, you'll have, at the end of the turn, you'll have a position like this. Next turn, you do the same bounce again, then you're in this position. Then you get a build, you build a fleet in Naples, is your next build. And then that's how you would go for this opening. And this is the safest opening. This is the opening I'm going to be recommending pretty much for anyone who doesn't know what they're doing. Now, say you're like, well, yeah, that was cool and all, but that seems a little bit boring, because you're just getting one thing. You're not really helping out or having much of an effect on the world. You're in the sad part is, as Italy, you're in a similar position to Turkey in that you really only have like 3 moves. However, Italy has a much different kind of influence, whereas Italy has more of they're in the way, right, for France, for the France and English alliance. So you need to think about that. So one move that I find particularly fun is to go Venice to Piedmont, Rome to Venice, and then Naples to Ionian. So what you're doing here is you're setting up like a double front. You're saying, because remember, France will normally on its move, they'll go out to Brest, probably go to Burgundy, and go to Spain. Standard French moves. Again, you might have a standoff here, and then have the Serbia-Budapest move from Austria. That's generally what happens. If you have a good relationship with them, and this is something I'll point out later, but there's a way you can get away with only doing one here. But anyway, let's focus on the French right now, because obviously in the next turn you're taking this fleet and you're going to Tunis to get your guaranteed build to get your second fleet in Naples. But by having this army here in Piedmont, you're threatening Marseille. So there's a couple of options the French player has when they're thinking about this, and we talked about this in the French video. In this scenario, depending on what Germany does, if Germany moves to Ruhr, you pretty much sacrifice Belgium as France, and France will go ahead and make a move into Marseille, and then that's that. However, if, for whatever reason, you are talking to France, or you can get, if you, this is the cool part, if you as Italy can get England to convince France to attack Munich, then at that point, you know that Spain will go to Marseille, like this, and then what you do is instead of going for the bounce, you give no order to that. If anything, you support it in. So that way what happens is that the French player will be forced, they'll probably end up doing this, expecting to have the bounce into Spain. That isn't what happens. They only get one build, significantly hurting France. That's a very good way to hurt France. Another scenario, if someone's a less experienced French player, they might be in a situation where perhaps if Kiel does the Holland move, and then they get a Ruhr Munich. So this is a very anti-French play. If that happens, then you know for sure that this Munich one will be under duress, and you might see an English Channel move, something like that. This is pretty rare, though, this kind of a setup, because what it's doing is it's giving England the rights to essentially take Denmark for free and get 2 builds. So let me move a little bit so you can see that. Yeah, so if in this scenario where Germany does an assault on France at the outset is really bad, more commonly you'll see something like this, or obviously the most traditional, the Blitzkrieg. So when the Blitzkrieg happens, one thing that can happen is Germany, which is why, again, for Italy, right, remember, we're focusing on an Italy perspective, Munich will sometimes go to Burgundy and cause a bounce in order to guarantee that on the next move with Ruhr and Burgundy, that it would end in this position for Germany, which is very good, because then Germany, of course, gets a build here, and very likely, depending on the trust with England, will get Kiel with a fleet. So that's likely what would happen in that. So if there's a bounce, that again becomes, so that's the question, right? If on the first turn, before, when everything's all set up, if on the first turn when France is moving, if France goes out to Brest like normal, France goes to Spain, France goes to Burgundy, Germany goes to Burgundy, Kiel goes to Denmark, and Berlin goes to Kiel, or Kiev, or what, is it Kiel? Yeah, it's Kiel. So then what happens here? Well, you've just moved here. You've now forced this to retreat back into where it came from. Germany has to go to where it came from. Now you're threatening Marseille. So now the French player has to make a decision. Do they think that you're going to move in and try and get an extra supply center? Or does France think that, which if they thought you were doing that, they would move in? Or does France think you're going to do the bluff? In which case, staying there to get their 2 builds is the advantageous position. Which, in that case, if you, depending on negotiations, you convince them for whatever and said, "Oh no, I'm not doing that." If you're a very good diplomat, which, by the way, if you're France, you shouldn't fall for this. You should always take the risk and get the 1 build. It sucks. It's slower, but it has to be done. Especially, there is a way France can counter that, and we'll get to that in a second. But essentially, yeah, so if this guy's here, then he only gets the 1 build, and there's only one thing to get covered up. Likely a fleet in Brest, however, especially if you're going to come around. What's interesting here is that with this scenario, either, in the scenario where this gets covered, which is 2 out of the 3 scenarios, I want to point out, statistically, in this scenario, France will not be able to construct a fleet there. That's the key. Because as Italy, you're still getting your fleet. You get the fleet in Naples anyway. And then, right, because you have the fleet. So then what happens is you see a move like this. Very anti-French. It's good if you have a good relationship with Austria. And so then what you're doing is you're stalling it out. Because at the worst, that has to go out to the mid-Atlantic. So then at the next move, you support yourself into the Gulf of Leon. And you now have a commanding lead. Which is very, that's one of the few benefits of being Italy, is that if you can slow down France, you have a very good chance of progressing in the game. Now, of course, that is assuming you have a trusting relationship with Austria. So anyway, this is a 2 out of 3 scenario. Now, how does France counter it? And it's pretty obvious to tell if they're intending to counter it. It's essentially, if instead of first move Burgundy for France to counter the possible German Munich move, if instead when Marseille goes to Spain, if Paris goes to Gascony, that's a direct counter. They're directly countering that. However, they're taking the risk that they have a guy in Burgundy, which also isn't good. France is tough to play. Again, it depends on your diplomacy skills. Obviously, if you're better at diplomacy, you're not going to have as much of an issue. It's still an issue. For example, if France can convince Germany to blitzkrieg forward, and they see this first move, well, now they have to do this because there's no reason to go after an empty one where France will be getting 2 builds and will likely, depending on the trust, will be doing, assuming that they have good English relationship, get some sort of a build like that. And that's what we're trying to avoid, right? As Italy, in terms of if we're talking about an anti-France play, we're talking about preventing the fleet from being built there. That's kind of what we're dealing with. So yeah, if you're France, you can counter it. You just leave yourself weak to Germany. And then, of course, there is always the option of what if you go to Burgundy and then they happen to blitzkrieg anyway? Well, in this scenario, it's really simple. The correct move here is to hold. You don't... Well, actually, as France, you may as well attack. Or support a unit in to block. So that's the other thing you need to think about as France is, as France, you're likely going to take this army to move in, which means that this army should support it in case they try and do a prearranged bounce with France, because if France goes in together, right, to get him back in that position in the end and block it out and clear that up, which is ideal. If this Italian fleet supports either of those going in, then that will also be covered. So it's really tough for France if you do this. And in my opinion, this is the only way that Italy can really get a strong attack on France. Now, let's say for whatever reason you don't want to go after France, which is a completely legitimate strategy. You now have 2 opponents. And this is kind of going to tie into the Austrian video. But I wanted to do it in the Italian one because this move benefits Italy more than Austria. It's called the Lepanto. We're just going to go over that real quick. So essentially, what do you do in the Lepanto? Well, it involves you guys having a rock-solid relationship here and a rock-solid relationship here. You pretty much, you're going to give some countries some free roam, right? So first turn, in order to know for sure you can actually do this successfully, what you're doing is you're saying, okay, Austria, you need to go to the actually, you could have them go to Albania. Yeah, you could, or no, they should go to Adriatic, because that's giving a different, well, I guess there's no reason. Well, I'm just like looking over it. It doesn't seem like there's any reason not to have them do Albania, Vienna to Budapest, then go Ionian Sea, and then move to Naples and Piedmont, right? So that's how you do it to defend. So then, this is first turn. Keep in mind, this is part of a longer strategy. And this would assumingly be better if you have the standoff in the Black Sea with Russia for Turkey. And this is an anti-Turkey play, by the way. This is not anti-Austria. So then what would happen is on the next turn, you'd essentially convoy over to Tunis. And then you'd do the disruption over there. This Serbian unit would be supporting that. And this guy would be supporting Serbia to avoid any cutting. So then you'd be in this situation. Which then on the next turn, what happens is you pretty much set up for a build, right? So they would like build possibly a fleet there. But in any case, you're building a fleet here in Naples. So the goal is, right? So that way that this fleet can go into the Aegean Sea. Then this fleet goes into the Eastern Mediterranean. And then this fleet goes into the Ionian Sea. So what is this doing? It's making it so that way now there's a convoy of Tunis all the way into Syria. This is called the Lepanto. It's where anytime 2 countries work together in order to, ship units. So you can do this by yourself. This does connect. However, there might be situations. This is assuming best case scenario. This is assuming Turkey's being blind and Turkey doesn't build a fleet in Smyrna. If Turkey builds a fleet in Smyrna, this is why you need Austria to be there, and you need to have. So you'd be in this situation, right? Beforehand with your build in Naples, and then presumably Austria is just going to build army, and that actually might, if Austria is smart, they'll build 2 armies there, is what you're going to be looking at. So this is the position you're likely to be in if you're trying to do a Lepanto, assuming that Turkey can see it. If Turkey sees this, there's no way to actually know for sure if it's a Lepanto, because this is standard moves. If Austria built a fleet here, then he knows it. Then Turkey knows that this is bad. But more likely, Turkey builds an army, depending on the relationship over here, to keep up the supply chains and boost over. However, just building a fleet in Smyrna is not bad as well for Turkey. So that's something you have to think about. So another way, so say you're in this position right here. Let's pretend these are the builds. Say it's an army. And you see a fleet there. Well, how are you doing it? Essentially, what's going to happen is you're going to be asking. It's a guessing game. You don't know which one is where, but Ionian needs to be sent to the Eastern Mediterranean. Greece goes to the Aegean Sea. And then you pretty much are going to be doing a difficult shuffle here. You might have a bounce, right? So you could have a bounce in Greece, but it doesn't matter because Austria owns it. So then that'll just bounce out. This should really go to Albania. If you have a trusting relationship, that's why after this shenanigans, over here in France, this army moves back over to Venice. That's really important. Don't forget to move Piedmont into Venice, otherwise you're going to be screwed. And then this guy goes to the Ionians. So then, either way, if there's a bounce... So if there's a bounce here, this will go there, that'll come out. You still have the supply chain for the next one. He'll try and cut it, but what you might want to do is, in fact, go ahead and convoy over any, you might want to try and convoy around or support it. If they support it, that could help. Now, ironically, while you are trying as Italy to get a unit into Syria, now if this player is bad and they do this here and they go anti-Russia, right? If Austria can convince Turkey to go anti-Russia, you go straight into Smyrna and take that command center. That's not going to be happening. You're going to Syria first, right? That's what you would do. Now, this isn't the best way to attack Turkey, though. Why? Because it takes too many darn moves. There's a much simpler way to attack Turkey, but this requires a relationship between Italy and Austria that's even stronger than what I've already mentioned here, right? So let's go back to the beginning of the game. Let me... real quick, just reset it here so you guys can see what I'm talking about. And this is in a very anti-Turkish. You also need a good relationship with France. Pretty much, you give France the dream setup where they're looking like this. They're going to be looking like they're coming after you, but you let France get into that position without any threat. So what happens first turn then if you're going to be working together as friends? Essentially, what's going to happen is you're going to go Ionian Sea, Naples, and you're going to go to Trieste. Pretty standard, you expecting to bounce. But here's the interesting part. So it's spring, right? So that means command centers are not taken yet. You have a fleet go to Albania. Budapest goes into Romania first turn, because you're expecting Russia to do the Black Sea bounce while Moscow goes to Ukraine and Galicia, and then we have a rotate into Budapest. Even better, perhaps, you just have them do the bounce standard, so that way you're in this position first turn. So this is first turn, and you're thinking, and everyone thinks, what? What's going on? What? You're being attacked. And they expect Austria to have a full retreat, and Austria says something like, oh, don't worry, guys, I'm going to turn around and deal with them. But they're not. Oh, this doesn't exist. Right. So what happens? Second turn which is, in my opinion, the kind of more crazy one. What happens is this... these are in this setup, presumably. So the way you make it go a little nuts is because they'll see this as open, but what happens is that this Romanian fleet is going to support this army going into Serbia, right? Pretty cool idea. And then this fleet from Italy supports a movement into Greece to avoid a bounce. So then look at this. You have 3 units, possibly 4, onto Germany, and that's second turn, right? This guy, he's just going to hang around. You still get your one build. You would build a fleet in Rome in this situation. You don't build in Venice if you can. So that way you're still preparing to defend against France. But in this scenario, now you're helping to kill Turkey. And then, of course, in the next subsequent moves, you'd want to move into the Eastern Mediterranean. You'd want to have this fleet support it to get in there with that supporting it. Actually, probably you'd want this to be the attacking unit, this to support the attack, and this to support the attack. And that would just wipe it off the board. There's nowhere to retreat to. But essentially, no matter how you want to divvy it up, you could have a GNC, for example. That's another option. In any situation, this is going out. This army, again, very sad, still has to move, get convoyed over at some point, because you still need to get Tunis, right? Another thing you can point at that is pointed out is that once you get your one build, you could choose to go ahead and just make a fleet, have this fleet go into here, and have this guy convoy him over early to make sure you get the double build. It'll sit there. Then on second turn, you do something like this, which is very strong for Italy, while, of course, working with them. And that's assuming, keep in mind, this is assuming you have a rock-solid relationship with Austria, and it's assuming you can get a helpful, at the very least, Russian player. For example, Russia knows that if it doesn't keep standing off of the Black Sea, then they'll have the advantage to be able to get the triple support and shut it all down. So you need a cooperative Russia as well. It's a three-way alliance. It's difficult, but you can pretty much wipe out an army from them in a spring move. Then, because of their situation, obviously, because they'll presumably be this army here, that's what you offer to Russia, right? You say, Russia, as Austria, right? You say, hey, Russia, it's okay. I'll let you bring your army into Romania. The Black Sea will still be stood off, but now Greece moves to the Aegean Sea, and that's how they continue. Then you, as Italy, this is the fun part, you just sit there and you just, you go back to Trieste and take that. So there's a lot of backstabbing potential. If you're a friendly if you're a friendly Italian player, you can take Greece to help further your war campaigns. This is a very Italian strategy. So why does it help Austria? Because Austria still gets 1, 2, 3, 4, and presumably they get Smyrna. They're gonna. The point is, you're divvying up Turkey amongst the three players. Everyone gets a piece of it. You get 2 on this coast, and then Austria gets. You give Austria 2 pieces here. Italy doesn't take part in actually cutting up Turkey. It's just that you allow yourself to get 2 builds, so then you can get another build of an army in Venice, and then you're on the warpath. Right? That's how you would do that. Pretty complicated. Again, you need to be pretty lucky with Italy, because you could also get destroyed in, like, you know, not even that many moves. For example, in a standard setup, what if you get... So let's talk about the Doomsday Scenario before we wrap it up here for the basic stuff. What's an option? We'll say... Or actually, you know what? Here's some simple stuff. Let's say you wanted to attack... You wanted to attack Austria. You didn't want to be friends. You say, hey, I want to do a fake Lepanto. So what does that mean? Well, it means you go Tyrolia and Venice. Then you, of course, still go to the Ionian Sea to go get your one build. They'll presumably, if you've tricked them into a trusting relationship, they'll have a fleet in Albania. Because, okay, so you might be wondering, why is Austria going to Albania? Because Albania is a signal that they're not being aggressive towards Italy. That's why if they've agreed to be non-aggressive, they've essentially gone to Albania as a show of good faith. Budapest goes to Serbia, and then you might see another standoff at Galicia. As to be expected, Russia's over here in Ukraine. Sorry. And then you have standoff, Bulgaria, Constantinople, normal Turkish move. So this is the first round. So now they're thinking, what the heck is going on? You know, this looks horrible if you're Austria, right? Because what's your next move? If you don't support, if Serbia does not support itself into Greece, by the way, so even though it looks like you'd want to be able to 2-2 to shut that down, you're better off as Italy moving into Tunis. You still get your build. You always get Tunis. If you don't get Tunis, you're pretty much out of the game, because you're so significantly behind at that point. They have a problem. And then, of course, you build a fleet in Naples. Get ready for the incoming French, because you should just always expect the French to come after you. Maybe you'll get lucky. Maybe you can convince... If they're fighting England, you know, if for whatever reason, you know, if England does the move where they go to London, you know, if they're doing that, then maybe France will be a little more keen to leave you alone, but very unlikely. Often we see an English and French alliance. You should expect that. What's interesting is that it also opens you up. You could say, you could even say, hey, don't worry, I'm not going after Trieste. I'm just going to Munich and betray them. You know, there's all kinds of things. For example, a less experienced Austrian player might even do Budapest, which would make things even better for you. Don't expect that, though. They should be in Vienna going after Galicia to block the moves twice. So, like, say this is the end of the first round. Say Germany did a standard blitzkrieg move forward. Let's say France, now in their normal first turn position, sees this after the first turn. Well, they might say, hold on, we need to support Belgium there. And they're really glad you're not over here, right? That's a sign of good faith. So if this is the end of the first turn, then we're talking about the second turn. This is the fall, right? So in the fall, then, if you're talking to, depending on your diplomacy with Austria, depending on how good you are, you could say, hey, Austria, don't worry. Just do your normal move where you go there. This gets supported in from this. This might go there. Or what you might see happening is just another standoff, in which case Romania might just become vulnerable. What's interesting is that the Ukraine always attacks, so you get into this stalemate situation here, which is why it's important for Turkey to have allies, because you have the the Black Sea standoff happening. This would go into there because they know that this can't get balanced with support. So this is just kind of how the board kind of ends up looking. So if they trust you, for example, and if you tell them, oh, I'm going to Munich and Piedmont, you could say I'm doing that move to go after both players. It's devastating. That's something they'll think about. If Germany sees this first move, they'll be thinking, hey, I want to go back and defend and get into Holland. More likely than not, they might end up, oh man, in this situation, it sucks to be Germany, but we're not concerned about Germany, right? Because what we're doing is we would go talk to Germany and we'd say, hey, look, I'm not going to attack Munich. I'm going to go after Trieste, which, depending on how you talk to Austria, you could say, Austria, hey, look, we both know, and you'll need help from Turkey, by the way. In this scenario, you're allied with Turkey, but you essentially say, hey, Turkey, I want you to attack Greece. And then regardless of what they say, you go to Austria and you say, hey, Turkey told me that they're going to attack you in Greece. Which means that in order for Austria to get its second build, it has to support itself. Now, it could choose not to. It's very possible it could choose that to move backwards, support itself in, block it. But then keep in mind what it's sacrificing. It's saying that you're giving Turkey 2 builds. You don't want to give Turkey 2 builds. They get an army and a fleet, and then Austria is really in trouble. They don't want to give Turkey the second build if they can help it, or at least not right away. So more likely you'll see something like this, another standoff. This army is the attacking army, because this army needs to be supporting it to make sure it can't get cut in case they go that way to try and block it, the support, right? To cut the support, because then it would get tough. So you take Trieste. And then from that point, in the second move, say they stand off, everything shuffles around, they get Greece. So look at that. Now they don't get a build because they only have 3. Austria only has 3 resources. They don't get anything. Presumably, depending on what the alliance, how this is working out, Turkey will still get their build. They'll get an army. They should get an army. And then you pretty much just carve it up. Because think about it. Now, at the end of the fall, you get 2 builds as Italy. This is an Italian strategy with 2 builds, because don't forget, we got Tunis first turn. What do you do? Well, you need to follow it up with a fleet, and in this scenario, you might actually consider getting an army in Rome. So this is one thing to note. If you do it in this direction, you then have the freedom to put an army in Venice, which might be better for you, but depending on what the French player's doing, you might still want, with your second build, to just get another fleet in Rome anyway. So you have 3 fleets, you could do a move like this, where you're in this position. That's always a fun one to be in as Italy, because you're able to, if needed, retreat to there, and you can convoy out. But essentially you're holding it. Again, with support, you should be able to crush Austria. So what if, as Italy, you want to go, and I know this video is going to be longer than the other one, just because Italy is very hard to play, and I want to give people an understanding of what they can do as Italy. And I'm happy to go back to other countries as well if there's any questions about options. So let's say Doomsday Scenario. Let's say no one's coming after you, or well, no one's helping you. In a horrible scenario, or at least in a situation where you have an inexperienced German player, they might do something like Tyrolia. First turn. Let's say you do the standard swap here. Say you're going after doing the French play. Let's say they do standard moves. They bounce. Well, now you got a problem, because now Germany's doing the same thing you're doing. You could even support Germany in, but what it does mean is that, like, what if you had done this move, right, where you do Naples, the even better play for you, because you're convoying out and you have presence in both oceans. That's why that's better. Like, if you're in this position, let's just say, because this is a harder position, what do? Well, outside of diplomacy, you have to move back. France knows that you're going to move back, and you just accept that. You get your 1 build, you build a fleet in Naples, and you move on with your life. If you can convince Germany to go after Austria, you then go into do the French play, and you proceed like normal. That's assuming the Germans cross the border. They shouldn't do that, though, because Europe should be tied up in a big mess. If Germany knows what they're doing, they don't want to come this way. In an ideal world, you want to have all three of these center powers working together, because that'll make it a lot easier for you guys to succeed. Because in this scenario, in a best case scenario that is super fantastical, but technically, if everyone was playing nice, you could see a board that looks something like this on the second turn. And in this scenario, with the being as so crowded as it is, because of you're getting, say for example in the best case scenario, you're getting your 2 builds. You have one there. You get Naples, so you're up to 5. Germany's up to 6. Austria's up to 5. Then at that point, you're pretty much able to just start sprawling out. Now this won't happen. More likely, if Germany was coming down here and well, anyway, if Germany's doing the right thing, if they're playing correctly, they will at least get 2. Germany should never expect to have Belgium. They'll build Munich and Kiel. They don't get Berlin. Generally, they don't get Berlin. Obviously we talked about what if they go there, then that'll change everything. Germany shouldn't be a threat to Italy. If Germany is threatening Italy, then that means Germany's probably not doing something right. And then that pretty much covers everything you want to be doing. The last little bit I'll talk about is, what if you really do want to go after Munich? What if you want to go after the Germans? Well, let's talk about that. That's a little bit more extensive. You need help from Austria and Russia, as well as, again, England and stuff to be tied up. You're a little bit more dependent on your allies, and I don't like this as much. I like strategies where you can mathematically figure out the best scenario for yourself based on the way people are talking. So, for example, if you went to Tyrolia, Bohemia, and Silesia with all 3 of these people working together, and Germany does, say, the standard opening play to do something like that and be in that position, then you through negotiation, you need to find a way to get yourself in Munich, instead of what Austria is going to say is, hey, you should support me into Munich. If Burgundy's here, they'll say, no, support me into Munich. Granted, they might have to help England get into Belgium, so France isn't as much of a problem necessarily for them. Let me zoom in a little bit here, just so you guys can really see what's going on. Essentially, so what would that mean? Did that mean to be a first move like this? Because you need to back it up, because again, presumably Austria is going down there. They might even, depending on their trust, be in Galicia because of untrusty, because they won't necessarily know Russia's moving into Silesia, which then looks really bad. And that in fact helps you, right? Because then we know that they're going to have to move back. They might feel a need to go back to cover their own borders, depending on, with Turkey moving in. The fact that this is an unsupported move means that Turkey actually can freely go into Serbia and Bulgaria. So that is one downside. This is a Turkey pro, a pro-Turkey thing, which is happening, because obviously they would expect, why Turkey should never be doing the Romania play, because they know they'll get stood off. Everything shuffles backwards. In this scenario, after seeing first move, they should be moving like that, and Russia will get that territory regardless. You can talk to Germany about if Russia goes, if Russia gets its upward Sweden one. We don't know. You don't know. There's no way to really predict for that. But essentially, the point is, you're here. There'll be threats. Austria will be forced to pull back in a sense. Depending on what Germany does, Germany might decide to go for the Holland-Berlin, which is best for you. Probably not. Probably they'll most likely go back and back. They'll back up for both of them. Which would mean that you'll need support from France. You could say, hey, France, support me in, then I'll help you get into Belgium. That's a good deal. France says, sure, you get supported in that way. You could even go into Trieste. Keep in mind you're going here. And then technically, in this unlikely scenario, you get 3 builds. What do you do with 3 builds? Well, you build army there, and then you build 2 fleets. This is the best case scenario for Italy, is that Italy will just get all 3 builds. This doesn't happen. You would need to have a pretty incompetent Austria to figure out what's going on, right? If Austria saw this first turn, especially if you went Ionian, right? If you went Ionian, let me turn it, and zoom it out a little. If you went Ionian first turn, and you had something like this, and Austria had done the typical move of going something like this, so that way Warsaw stood off, you have the basic fence here. If they're in this position, then you go back to the original scenario where it's like, oh, they got to come back. Even if you tell them, again, it'll depend on your diplomacy, but if you can convince them to go this way, maybe. But again, they'll have done the bounce. Austria will typically just do the bounce and be okay with that. But what's funny though is when when France tries to predict the Italian move and they go to what is that? Gascony. If they go to Gascony, what happens is you are forced to not go to Munich as Italy, because you have to assume you'll get bounced out and that they're going to go for Holland, therefore making it a waste of a move, because then they'll end up in that position, which is fine for them, which means you again are switching back. You accidentally have become anti-Austria because of the Germans. Now, if the Germans are doing the funky move where they go Holland, Kiel, and Silesia, or something like that, like an anti-Russian. If they're feeling anti-Russian, they go to Prussia maybe, or something like that. Rarely will that happen. Again, they might go to Burgundy. Actually, let's say they go to Burgundy. Well, there's still one away, depending on, if you can convince Germany that you're going after Austria, you convince Austria you're going after Germany, then sure, you can do whatever you feel like doing, but depending on who you think is a stronger ally. Then, of course, this has to pull out. I mean, heck, you could have even, in a perfect scenario, you're in this situation as well, where you could, you're either getting Trieste, but if you want to keep Austria as an ally, you go this way. And get your 3 builds that way. Again, always going to Tunis. Then you get the builds as I recommended. Obviously, you can build as you wish, but I'd recommend getting 2 fleets over here to eventually just crush France, assuming you have a good relationship with Austria. Austria still gets its 2 builds, so you know that Austria will, as long as you don't backstab them, you know that Austria will look like this. You know that you will look like that. And then that's the scenario going into the round, assuming everything goes perfectly and Germany doesn't go and defend it. Again, that'll depend on your diplomacy, what you can manage. So anyway, guys, that'll pretty much cover everything. As a word of just general note, never move your fleet into the Adriatic. You're wasting your moves by doing that. Like if say you really are trying to do the committal thing. If you do this, yes, you have a chance to presumably. Let me fix it. Yes, from this scenario, if you did this first move, which is impossible, by the way, if you went Ionian Sea, you went up, you're already signaling the anti-aggression. So this is an anti-Austrian play. Irregardless, Austria never wants to see 2 Italian units moving up, so you can try and say you're going that way, but if you move in there, you're wasting a move. This always needs to go to Tunis, just so you know. So never worry about putting a fleet there. If you happen to be free for whatever reason, you build a fleet there, you're pretty much just holding on. You will need to hold off France, right? Because France will come after you, especially if they have an alliance with England. France, what they're going to be doing is they're going to be getting double fleets in. They'll have a fleet in Marseille, and then they'll be out here. If you don't have the fleets to match them, right, because you're coming from Tunis, then if you can't stand them off, then you're stuck. So just never pull your fleet this way is all I'll say about that. Anyway, guys, that'll be the end of the Italian strategy video. This was our longest video because there's a lot to talk about with Italy, because Italy, while it is the hardest to play, it also has a lot of options that people don't really think about, and I wanted to make sure that newer players who maybe don't quite understand the game are aware of all of the options that they have as the Italian player. So you're not screwed over. You're not doomed as Italy to automatically lose the game. You just need to have an understanding of which moves to make based on which relationships you trust. If you trust no one, just go Naples and Tunis and have these guys do this defensive play, and then you'll just be okay. You get the fleet. Because what you're doing, right, as Italy, is you're trying to see if you can get your second build. If you can't get the second build, oh well. Italy normally only gets one. They have a slow start. Don't worry about it. And always move to the Ionian Sea when you can, because in case for some stupid reason they butt heads and they did the Romania play. In this one scenario, you go Greece to prevent Turkey from doing that. That's the only time you'd have that as an advantage, but generally you want to go there. Or just convoy over, then next turn, heck, if you can convince Turkey to do something like that, you could say, hey, convoy over, you get Romania. There's options. It's just, that never really comes up, and I wouldn't worry about that. That's more for like advanced stuff. If people really know what they're doing, they have a set plan from the outset. So anyway, guys, thank you all so much for watching. As always, I'm Elwirfy, and I'll see you guys next time.